There are different kinds of power. One will build a wall, one will plant a garden. We should know by now, only one will bear fruit. It's from our poem today. I had the pleasure of witnessing what I found to be a fairly comical event at our Earth Camp this past summer. It was the very first day of Earth Camp, and the kids were gathering into their small groups. There was one group that was all fourth, mostly fifth grade boys. Many of you remember that group. They were memorable. And they gathered together, and I was hanging out with them, and I got to overhear how they were getting to know each other and introducing each other. The names I will not share. I will protect the innocent. But, yeah. Oh, sorry. She said a name, and I was like, what? So, it started out, benign enough. What grade are you in? I'm in 5th grade. Cool. I just finished 5th grade too. I'm 10 and a half. You're 10 and a half? Well, I'm 10 3/4. I'm the oldest at my school. And then another kid over here is, I'm the oldest at my school. Like, no, we don't mean that you're in 5th grade. We mean, how old are you exactly? What month were you born? And then somehow they switched topics, and then it became, have you seen this movie? No, isn't that rated R? I don't know, probably. Someone else over here is, I've seen a rated R movie. Well, I've seen one too. I've seen 5 rated R movies. Dude, that's nothing. I've seen like 100 rated R movies, maybe 1,000. Then it went on to objects. My mom bought me a new skateboard this week. I have 2 skateboards. I have 3 skateboards. Well, one's my brother's, but if you count that, then I have 3 skateboards. It was so blatant. It was the most blatant one-upping I have ever witnessed. There was zero subtlety. It was literally, who are you, and am I better than you? I need to show you that I'm better than you. And they weren't even being nasty about it. They weren't even like making snide faces at each other. It was just this genuine, but I have this, no, but I have this, but I, just trying to find a place for themselves. Maybe when you read our gospel about the disciples having a dispute about which of them is the greatest, usually when I read that, it doesn't really seem that realistic to me. I'm like, people don't just openly talk about that. These kids did, for sure. And we as adults, I think, do in more subtle ways, for sure. There is a need in us that I don't know where it comes from or how far back it goes, but it was certainly there in these 5th grade boys. There is a need to overcome some sort of inner insecurity or inner fear or inner sense that we're not enough or that we aren't going to belong or that we're not going to have what we need or something. There's some need to overcome this insecurity, and we have a tendency to do that through trying to dominate other people. We want to set up a hierarchy and show that we are better than other people. We want to establish our dignity by comparison to others, that we must have more dignity or more worth than. I remember this poem. Again, there are different kinds of power. One will build a wall, one will plant a garden. We should know by now only one will bear fruit. Today we are looking at the Last Supper. And one of the things that people have noticed about the way that I preside at our table is I often use a liturgy of the Last Supper that is very inclusive, that paints a picture of people gathered around the table more than the number 12, more than 12 people. The women, the children, the cooks, the people whose house it was, this grand gathering of people. And some people have asked me where that comes from because they thought that in the Bible it's just the 12. It comes from some scholarship around what the Passover meal might have been like and likely was like. So we know from Exodus what people are asked to do by Moses to keep the Passover every year. Moses says to the people, "Remember this day on which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, because the Lord brought you out from there by the strength of the Lord's hand." So this is the day that the people are celebrating moving from slavery into freedom, moving from a domination culture where people are exerting power over them into a culture of community and freedom. And Moses says, "Tell the whole congregation of Israel that on the 10th of this month, they are to take a lamb for each household." A lamb for each household. If a household is too small, it will join with another household. And this is because they have to eat all of it. "You shall let none of the lamb remain until morning." Remember, there's a hearkening back to the liberation from slavery, and so they weren't going to be there the next couple days. They needed to leave. So they needed to eat all the food that was there, and they needed to go. And so you have to gather a big enough group of people, your household and other households put together, to be able to eat the whole thing. So there is nothing left. It even has a section about slaves, and that the slaves who are circumcised, as long as they are part of the tradition, they also take part in the meal. So this tradition is a gathering of the whole household. It's not just the men. And then when we fast forward to Jesus and his celebration of this meal, we think about how Jesus is in hiding, and he has to do these special plans to find a place to host this meal. We don't really know why, but I think one thing we could think about is that he's trying to host a meal with 12 different households, and maybe even more than that. He needs a big space. It says in Luke that this was a large room. This was a room that could host this big gathering of all these different households. "Where may I eat the Passover with my disciples?" Jesus said. And disciples in Luke is larger than the 12. Luke talks about just the 12 specifically sometimes, but disciples is everybody, including the families of the 12 who were probably disciples too. Another bit of context about Luke is that when numbers of people are recorded, women and children are not counted. So like when we have the feeding of the 5,000, it specifically clarifies that it's 5,000 not including the women and the men. The women and the children. It's 5,000 men. So there's a tendency to count households. Men and all that men's people. Men and all that men's people. So there's this household or this counting of men that is recorded. And so when it says that Jesus takes his place at the table, the 12 take their place also, that doesn't necessarily exclude the people, the families of the 12, the families and friends and slaves or whatever is going on in their households. We don't know exactly what that Last Supper looked like, but I like to picture it as being a gathering of more than just men, because I think that speaks to the vision that Jesus has of this world. Jesus is trying to offer us a different way of being, different than the one-upping of our domination culture. I can't help but reiterate what Juan Carlos talked about in his sermon a few weeks ago, where he talked about the word victory, and how usually victory is used in a military context, victory over another, dominating over another. And Juan Carlos suggested to us that we consider a different kind of victory, a victory over war, a victory over the culture of domination. I believe that that is what Jesus is all about. I believe that that is what he is doing at this table. He is gathering a group of ragtag people from a lot of different backgrounds in his movement, and he invites them to have a gigantic Passover meal together, and he is building a table that does not exclude, a table that does not insist on making sure everybody knows who is over other people. I think it's fitting that the kids at Earth Camp began with their age. Who's older? That person must be, better and somehow. Jesus literally in this passage says, the greatest must be like the youngest. He calls that out right there. The greatest must be like the youngest, the leader like the one who serves. In this upside-down kingdom, we and our hearts are turned completely inside out. Jesus invites us to let him heal that part of us that is insecure, that part of us that is fearful, that part of us that is carrying the burdens of the world, of all that's going on in our own households and all that's going on in the world around us. Jesus calls us to heal that in a different way, to set down the way of dominating to try to gain our security, to have victory over that way, and instead to pick up the cross, to pick up servanthood, to pick up lifting others up rather than trying to use them to get ahead. Tomorrow we will see where that leads. We will see that that does not lead to the kind of victory that the world recognizes. It actually leads often to things that the world finds shameful, things that the world wants to make fun of us for. But we also know what happens after that. We know that that is not the end, and that God will lift us up, and the seeds that are planted will bear fruit. So please join me in entering this practice of the great 3 days and taking up this kind of victory that leads us through the shadow of death and to new life.